To be honest, I thought people would have lost interest by now, but I'm a man of my word, so despite it being basically the end of the season, here we are talking about the fourth tier of Scottish football. Here are the Scottish League 2 grounds. Clifton Hill, Albion Rovers. You'll probably notice straight away that this ground is looking a little rough around the edges, but in a good way, I think. The main stand is home to the only seating in the house. I'm sure there are some pretty obstructed views back there, but it looks good. Over on the other side, we have a covered terrace that takes you back to the 1950s. In a good way, I think. And finally, over to the west of the ground is a rather scruffy looking grass embankment. I doubt anyone is sitting up there. It's probably just here for its aesthetic beauty. Galabank, an athletic. This stadium is part of an exclusive group of stadiums that sound like they're sponsored by a bank, but are not. There's Forthbank Stadium in England, Meadowbank Stadium in Edinburgh, and of course Bank of America Stadium in the US. This ground seems newer, cleaner, and shinier than Clifton Hill, but not necessarily in a good way. The facilities are good, but it doesn't have much in the way of character. And of course, some of that shininess is coming from the synthetic turf field, which should only be something the players care about, but it just doesn't look right. I understand why they do it though. New Dundas Park, Bonnyrigg Rose Athletic. I'm not 100% sure there are actually any seats at this ground. It seems to be all terracing, or just standing room of the flat variety. What it lacks in seats, it makes up for in colour coordination. Red walls, red rails, red roofs, well that's it. Another thing I like about this ground is how the grass sort of continues under the fence and onto the other side. Sort of like they're playing on a village green rather than a stadium. But yeah, it's comfortably the most rudimentary ground in the league. Dumbarton Football Stadium, Dumbarton. Although this stadium has just the one stand, it is a fairly impressive one. The exterior, consisting of red bricks and metallic kits, looks great, and inside it's made up of entirely covered seating. I often mention when a stadium has some sort of scenic backdrop, but unfortunately this one is overlooked by a rather decrepit looking building up there on the hill. Bit of an eyesore really. At least the one and only stand is facing away from the Dumbarton Castle, as they call it, and is instead facing the River Leven. But yeah, the stadium's like what you might see in any of the top leagues of Scottish and English football, just divided by 4. Bayview Stadium, East Fife. That's a perfect name for the stadium because, as Otis Redding would say, I left my home in Georgia. Hang on, let me do that again. That's a perfect name for the stadium because, as Otis Redding would say, it's sitting on the dock of the bay. And spectators get a view of the bay, ergo, Bayview. Until about a decade ago though, they also got a view of a rather large coal-fired power station, which, as hard as it is to believe, was even more of an eyesore than that Dumbarton Castle. Thankfully that was demolished in 2011, so an unobstructed view of the bay and the hills has returned. Come to think of it, it's a very similar stadium to the one in Dumbarton. Borough Briggs, Elgin City. This stadium is famous, in air quotes, for being the most northerly football stadium in the UK. And I mean proper football stadium. I'm sure there are football grounds on the Shetland Islands, but they don't count. Anyway, the colour scheme, or lack thereof, certainly matches what is presumably quite a gloomy climate. The roofs of the stands also might be fit for the climate, because they have a particularly steep slant to them, which suggests to me that this place might often experience sideways rain. But perhaps it's just for looks. Either way, I like them, as well as the ground in general. Station Park, Forthbank Athletic. With a whopping capacity of 6,777 and a quarter, This has the largest capacity in the league, which is quite fitting because Forfar is in the Angus region, and the Angus region, as you probably know already, is also home to the world's largest dog breed. They presumably use Angus meat in the local delicacy that is served at the ground, something called a Forfar bridie. It's like a Cornish pasty, except there are none of those pesky veggie tables. But yeah, it's an interesting ground. This stand in particular is quite eye-catching. We already talked about this stadium in the championship video, so I won't add much. One thing I will do is call it Ochilview Park instead of Ochilview, I think I said in that video. Another correction I need to make is, I believe when speaking about the Norway stand at this ground, I referred to Norway as being a small African country. And as many of you pointed out, Norway isn't actually that small, so apologies for that. Another member of the club, Forthbank Stadium, Stirling, Albion. Until this ground was built in the early 90s, the club played at a ground called Anfield, spelt with 2 N's to differentiate it from Liverpool's ground. As you can see, it would have been very easy to confuse the two. This ground is certainly an upgrade from that. In fact, it might be the most advanced stadium in the league. It has not 1 but 2 covered all-seater stands, as well as an open terrace at either end, if you do happen to want to experience the same conditions that the players are subjected to. I wouldn't say the ground itself is the prettiest, but that backdrop is rather nice. Situated next to a body of water called Black Stank, for some reason, is Stair Park, home to Stranraer. This ground has a nice mix of old and new. The brick-clad main stand, although small, dominates the rest of the stadium, whilst looking pretty good in the process. Over on the other side is an older stand that was up until recently a terrace, but has since been given some seats that match the main stand. At one end is a shed terrace, and at the other end are some trees with some grass in front of them. Nature's grandstand. Yeah, it's a well-rounded stadium. So there you have it. As for my favourite, I'm gonna have to think about that, but you'll be seeing it on the screen right now. Did future me make a good choice? Anyway, subscribe if you want to, and as always, thanks for watching, have a good one.